Welcome to Red Planet Live. I'm your host, Ashton Zeth. I'm elated to be hosting the Mars Society's podcast and leading the conversation about human exploration of the universe and the future settlement of Mars. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species. Thank you so much for joining us today and supporting Red Planet Live. Today's episode is very special for a few reasons. First, today's guest is an integral member of the Mars Society crew and really essentially the reason that we are all here today. None other than Mars Society president and founder, Dr. Zubrin. Here we go. Oh, there we go. One second. Hi, Dr. Zubrin. Thank you for being here today.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me. Good to meet you, Ashton.
Pleasure. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while. So I want to get everybody else up to speed about really who you are and why this is so important. So in addition to being the Mars Society's fearless leader, Dr. Zubrin is also president of Pioneer Astronautics, formerly a staff engineer at Lockheed Martin Astronautics in Denver. He holds a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics and a PhD in nuclear engineering from the University of Washington. Zubrin has also authored several books, including A Case for Mars, and is best known for his advocacy of the manned exploration of Mars. He is the driving force behind Mars Direct, a proposal intended to produce significant reductions in the cost and complexity of such a mission. Disappointed with the lack of interest from government in Mars exploration, Zubrin established the Mars Society in 1998, which works to educate the public, the media, and the government on the benefits of exploring Mars and creating a permanent human presence on the red planet. Again, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited about this.
You're most welcome. I do want to correct one thing that you said, which is that I founded Pioneer Astronautics and led it for 27 years, but in March of this year, I sold it off. And so now I'm going to be free to devote more time to the Mars Society and especially to the initiative that we're going to talk about here today.
I love it. That's amazing. Thank you for correcting me. I think that's integral to today's conversation. But before we kick off the conversation, just have a couple quick Mars Society reminders. Again, as we've already talked about before, the Mars Society convention is happening October 5th through 8th. That's just a couple months away at Arizona State University in Tempe. Now, don't fret. For those that are unable to attend in person, there is a virtual option. You just need to become a Mars Society member to access the convention online. Regular membership is only $50 annually. Students interested in participating do receive a discounted rate. Just need to use your student email address to sign up. And lastly, any ASU students will get free access to the Mars Society convention. There is a special link for ASU students, which can be found right there. All right, so Dr. Zubrin, on Red Planet Live, I do a segment called Question of the Day. It's really just meant to be an icebreaker, no right or wrong answers, but I know that you're knowledgeable on this topic, so I'm very curious to hear your answer. So today's question of the day is, which space movie do you think is the most realistic in terms of the scientific portrayal?
Well, Apollo 13 is the most realistic. It is realistic. Now, if we're talking, but Apollo 13 is not science fiction. It's history. But if you want to talk about science fiction, that is of things that haven't happened yet, the future in space and so forth, I would say it's The Martian. There are some technical errors in The Martian for sure. The windstorm is much too powerful. Even though you can have high winds on Mars, the air is very thin, and you wouldn't have wind blowing everything down as they show. But the spirit of it is realism, not fantasy. My main objection to The Martian, where it falls short, is that while it is a can-do movie, just like Apollo 13, it shows that we can take on the challenge of the unknown, challenge of space, and that's very positive. The thing that's missing is that the Matt Damon character is not interested in Mars. He's not interested in the question of whether there's life on Mars or the question of the human future on Mars. He's just somebody in a tough spot who needs to use his wits and grit to figure out how to get home. Now, actually, if people are interested, I've written a novel called First Landing. It was actually written in the late 90s, published in 2001. You can get it on Amazon. But it's a crew of 5 that also get into a jam. and they have to use their wits to figure out how to get out of it. But the difference is that several people in the crew have some understanding of the importance of Mars. So I think that could be the basis of the great Mars movie. So if you're into movies, making movies out there, contact me and we'll see what we can do.
I like it. I love it. Okay, this is the next book that's going on my Amazon, cart. I keep adding, books faster to my cart and starting them before I can finish them. But I know the next thing I'm going to put on that list. So thank you. One of my favorite movies, space movies specifically, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is Contact from the '90s with Matthew McConaughey, Jodie Foster. Do you think that is all even possible? Could we, through the satellites, get some sort of communication from extraterrestrial life, and then interpret that data and build a ship, and then be traveling somewhere into the far off galaxies?
I kind of doubt it, because broadcasting plans to your most advanced technology is not adaptive behavior. So I don't think that aliens would be broadcasting plans on how to build starships. And I do have questions whether they'd be broadcasting at all on the kind of radio frequencies that we use now. The Contact is based, well, the Jodie Foster character is based on Jill Tarter, who's a close associate of Frank Drake, and she's still prominent at the SETI Institute. And Drake and another fellow came up with this idea in 1960 of using radio to detect extraterrestrials. But the frequency that they specified, what's known as L-band, which was the state of the art for space communication in 1960, is obsolescent now, virtually obsolete. Things like X-band and Ka-band that we use now will probably be obsolescent in 20 years. X-band is already becoming obsolescent. And so looking for extraterrestrials with this kind of signals is almost in the same class as looking for them by the lights of their gas lights. That is, the radio we use now is probably a transitory technology. So maybe laser communication. So, well, there are people already looking for that, to look for light signals that are coherent instead of what comes from stars. I personally think that our best chance, first of all, I do think we will detect extraterrestrial biospheres, possibly within the next 10 years, possibly with Webb or the, I think W First is now called the Rubin telescope, by detecting oxygen spectra in extraterrestrial planets. That will let you know that there's a biosphere there, because Earth did not have free oxygen until we had plants to put it there. Because you see, oxygen wants to react with hydrogen, it wants to react with carbon, it wants to react with silicon, it wants to react with iron, it wants to react with aluminum. There's all sorts of stuff out there that will take down free oxygen and combine it. And so you don't have free oxygen in any quantity anywhere unless there's something fighting against chemical equilibrium, which is to say life. Okay, so if we detect a large amount of free oxygen in an exoplanet, we'll know there's a biosphere there. Now, the extraterrestrials could have detected our biosphere using the same technique for at least the past 500 million years. So they could have broadcasted to us in the Carboniferous or the Mesozoic or the Eocene or any time, and nobody would be answering back. So they could get kind of bored with that. So while I think we will detect extraterrestrial biospheres, to detect extraterrestrial technological civilizations, I think we'd be better off looking for high energy activities like interstellar travel or artificial suns or things of this kind that are really loud, that do not require conventions, that is to decode a radio signal. You have to understand the language, you have to understand the conventions of the transmission. Whereas to detect, a fusion energy torch drive or something like that, there are certain specific things about it that would make it distinguishable from a natural star, and or even an artificial singularity, that is to say, an artificial black hole that would be generating energy by things falling into it. There are things like this that we could look for that would give us a better chance. Technological signatures.
Sure. Okay. Exactly the answer that I was looking for. That gave me all the details that I was hoping in that exact question with in regards to contact. So earlier I mentioned that today's episode is special for a few reasons. Obviously, the first being Dr. Zubrin joining. The second reason is that Dr. Zubrin has a very special announcement to share with the world. Dr. Zubrin, can you share the incredible news?
Yeah. The Mars Society is right now launching a Mars Technology Institute whose purpose will be to develop the technologies needed to settle Mars. Okay. That is, we have ongoing right now entrepreneurial space race. The leading element is SpaceX, but there are others that are on their heels, both here and in other countries. And as a result of this, the SpaceX has already brought down the cost of space launch by a factor of 5 by introducing partial reusability. If Starship is successful, and I believe it will ultimately be successful, although there may be several more failures before it's successful, but then it will be possible for people to go to Mars and do exploration missions to Mars. But there are things that are needed to settle Mars that are not being developed by anyone and need to be if we're going to make humanity multi-planetary. In a number of places, for example, the case for Mars, or I have a new book coming out next year called The New World on Mars, What Can We Create on the Red Planet? We can talk a little bit more about that later in the show. I've made it clear what I think the major export of Mars will be, which is to say inventions. That is, a Mars city-state will be a group of technologically adept people in a frontier environment which challenges them to innovate, which forces them to innovate, and which they are free to innovate in radical ways. And so that they will make lots of inventions, and those inventions will be necessary for the success of their settlements, but they can also be licensed on Earth as IP and generate the income that Mars will need to pay for imports. Okay, so that's the business model of a Mars colony, export IP. Okay, well, someone might say to me, and they have, well, if you think that an inventor's colony could be a profitable enterprise, why not just start one on Earth right now? Now, there's some answers to that. That is, the Mars settlers will be far more driven. If someone they can't just quit if they get a better offer from Google and higher pay and this or that. They're going to be totally committed by their circumstances and also, frankly, by their selection. If you're someone willing to take on the risks and discomforts associated with challenging Mars, you're going to be somebody who's serious, who's not just looking for a nice lifestyle. You're looking to do something grand with your life. Okay, so all that is true. Yet, we can't do that now. But we can do a Mars inventors colony on Earth now. And so that while we won't have those advantages, we will have the advantages of much lower costs. And in point of fact, we can actually do it now. So we're doing it now. And that's what the Mars Technology Institute is going to be. Now, there's a number of critical areas. Actually, there's quite a few, but there's 3 that come right to the top of the list if we talk about settling Mars. And these have to do with food, energy, and the labor shortage that Mars will experience. Okay. The last one is something that Mars actually has in common with early America, where we had a severe labor shortage, which forced Americans to become virtuosos in labor-saving technology. We became gadgeteers, nation of gadgeteers, and that multiplied the power of our labor and therefore multiplied the average wage, and that was one of the major encouragements of people to come here. Right. Now, if you update that to today's technological horizon, labor-saving machinery continues to include labor-saving machinery and automation, but also robotics and artificial intelligence are all ways to attempt to deal with a labor shortage. So the Martians are going to be heavy innovative in those areas. Another is energy. There are no fossil fuels on Mars other than those that you can make using some other energy source. Solar energy exists, but it's quite weak and unreliable. Wind is too thin. We need advanced forms of nuclear energy. And while we can get by on Earth quite nicely, actually, from an engineering point of view, with nuclear reactors like the pressurized water reactors, which are totally dominant in the nuclear industry today, which only use about 1% of the energy in the uranium. And that has discouraged the development of breeder reactors. Also, the extremely hostile regulatory environment. Who wants to even dare try to do something new when it's hard enough getting a reactor license, which is exactly the same as things we've been building since 1954. Okay, but on Mars, we're going to want to get the full amount, or 90% of the energy out of the uranium, or as well as thorium, which is more common than uranium, and ultimately move to fusion. But then finally, and this is actually the upfront showstopper for a Mars colony, and that is food. Now, food is not a major consideration for doing a Mars exploration mission. You can bring your food. You send 4, 6, 8 people to Mars. You can bring the food, and it'll be about the 4th biggest item on the mass list, mass manifest of the mission. That is, it's not exactly in the noise, but it's really not something that determines the mission. Mm-hmm. But you can't import the food to support 100,000 person Mars town, let alone a 1 million person metropolis like Musk talks about. Okay, I mean, 100,000 people use 100,000 kilograms of food a day, which is 100 tons a day, which is a starship landing on Mars every day to bring in food. So that's unthinkable. You got to grow it. Mm-hmm. Well, looking at growing food on Earth, where there's been tremendous progress in the 20th century, we've eradicated hunger from most of the world. Still, take not an average farm in the developing sector. Let's take Iowa cornfield, which is incredibly productive. Iowa last year produced as much corn as the whole United States did in 1947, and we were already an agricultural superpower then. Even so, it's producing 12 tons of corn per hectare per year. Hectare is 100 meters by 100 meter plot, about 2.5 acres. Okay, that means per day 30 kilograms. So if you were feeding people on nothing but corn, you could feed 30 people with a hectare of Iowa cornfield. But of course, you wouldn't want people to eat nothing but corn. You don't want to introduce some variety, fruits, vegetables, meat, perhaps. So maybe 20 people. Okay. So now you add 100,000 people, that means 5,000 hectares. Okay. 5,000 hectares, which is huge. And that's assuming, by the way, that you could grow food in natural sunlight on Mars, even though, I mean, you could grow it, but that it would be as productive as Iowa, even though the light level is half as much. You could grow food. I mean, Norway, they grow food, and that's about Martian light, but it's not as productive, okay? Mm-hmm. But let's just say you could, 5,000 hectares. But if it goes with the light intensity, it's more like 10,000 hectares. And if you try to provide artificial light at, say, even 200 watts per square meter, okay, and average sunlight at noon in Iowa is 1,000 watts per square meter, 200 watts per square meter, you're talking about 10 gigawatts, which is to say about 1/3 of the amount of power that Australia uses, just to support a town of 100,000 people, not a particularly large city. So the problem here is that while photosynthesis at the cellular level is about 4% efficient, at the cornfield level, that is, if you calculate the energy hitting a cornfield, so that's the energy in, and you look at the energy that the corn itself represents coming out, it's about 0.2% efficient. Okay, so we're going to have to create forms of food production that transcend ordinary agriculture as it's currently practiced on Earth. And I believe that we can do this with biotech. I believe that we can do the first couple of steps in the food chain using the first physical chemical means and then actual biotech means to example, turn, say, methanol, which you can make with physical chemical techniques, into protein. And then you make those protein crackers. Well, you don't feed them to people, you feed them to tilapia or something in an aquaponic situation. And I'm just giving you sort of an example of one option.
Yeah.
Okay. And now you've got something that someone would actually want to eat.
Right. This is all going to be developed at MTI.
Right. So, and in fact, our initial focus will be in the biotech area.
That's great. I'm so excited by this, and I know that we're going to talk more about it. We're going to get some specific questions about MTI, which leads us to our next point. The third reason today's episode is special because we have another guest who's going to be joining the conversation. Alan Boyle is an award-winning science writer, space reporter, and contributing editor at GeekWire. Alan is the... Say that once more.
And a great guy.
And a great guy, absolutely. Alan is the mastermind behind Cosmic Log, former science editor at MSNBC, and the author of The Case for Pluto, How a Little Planet Made a Big Difference. Here we go. Welcome, Alan.
Hey, thanks for the good word to both of you. And Ashton, you forgot one little thing from my resume, that I grew up on a farm in Iowa. So I'm quite familiar with how the corn grows. Got to be knee-high by the 4th of July. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Now I'm going to hand it over to you, Alan, and I know that you have some questions for Dr. Zubrin, so I'll let you take that over.
Okay, Robert, it's great to see you, and you're a nice guy too. So there you go. We're the perfect pair here. You've talked about what the Mars Technology Institute would do. I'm interested in a few of the details of how it would be structured. I can imagine someone at NASA saying, hey, well, research about Mars, that's something that we do. And investors saying, well, why should, as you mentioned, why should I be paying to set up this institute when there are a lot of people working on this, and you know, we'll figure out how to do what needs to be done by the time we get there.
Okay. All right. Those are excellent questions. NASA is not doing this. Okay. NASA has some interest in situ resource utilization, as they call it. I prefer to call it local resource creation, because I don't believe there is any such thing as a natural resource. There's only natural raw materials. It's human creativity that turns materials into resources, and I could expand on that. But in any case, they have some of that, but it's all oriented towards the first exploration missions. So, for instance, one area where NASA is interested is making propellant on Mars for the return trip. And when I was at Pioneer, we did a lot of work for NASA in demonstrating systems that could make, for instance, methane and oxygen out of Martian CO2 and water. And this has now been demonstrated. And this, of course, is the basis of both my Mars Direct plan and Elon Musk's plan for sending starships to Mars. The Starship uses methane oxygen because we can make the return propellant on Mars. But as I mentioned earlier, food is not really an issue for NASA in terms of...
It's not as easy as planting a potato patch.
No. Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, okay, you can just bring the food with you on a human mission to Mars. I mean, if you've got a crew of 5 and they're using 1 kilogram of food a day and it's a 1,000-day mission, that's 5 tons of material that you're bringing. And you can do better if you bring dehydrated food and take water, which you can recycle. You can cut that down by, you know, a factor of 4 or so. So now it's 1 ton or somewhere between 1 and 5, depending. And that's a lot less mass than, say, the structure of the spacecraft. It doesn't dominate the mission. So, sure, you can bring MREs or TV dinners or spaghetti and cook. Okay. Now, the NASA does have some interest in creating bioregenerative life support, which produces a small amount of food, which would be good for the morale of a mission to have some fresh lettuce instead of just all preserved foods and so forth. But if we're looking at producing food at scale for a settlement, we need something entirely different from conventional field agriculture, entirely different from conventional greenhouse agriculture. And you see the now, if you look at the biotech industry, okay, so they are into biotech, of course, but they're looking for things first and foremost with high cash value, such as pharmaceuticals. Okay, that's very good. I'm glad the biotech industry is making novel pharmaceuticals. They are looking at boosting the vitamin content of various conventional crops, things like golden rice that have vitamin A in it, but it still needs the rice paddy. The idea of doing this, of really solving the problem of producing food in bulk with very limited acreage, with 2 orders of magnitude less acreage than is readily available to a terrestrial farmer. This is a different kind of biotech. And once again, we're interested in creating conventional foods. And once again, on Earth, even if you're doing something like aquaponics, the base of the food chain is photosynthesis. And you can do that because you have huge amounts of land or pond or whatever it is you've got relative to what the Martians will have. So they don't have the same driving constraints. Okay.
I get it. I get it. And I suppose the same is for robotics and also for power, nuclear power. I know we've talked a lot about nuclear power in the past as being the key energy source on Mars. So NASA is doing some things around the edges and all those things, but you are optimizing this for Mars.
And in particular for the settlement of Mars.
And why is it that private investors would want to sign on for this?
All right. Now, here's the thing. Okay. We believe that dealing with these technologies, these are not flight technologies, these are settlement technologies. We will be developing technologies in large part that have major potential terrestrial application. So, for instance, cheap food. All right. And so what we're going to do is license these technologies either by licensing the patents or creating spin-off companies around the various patents that are generated. And the Mars Technology Institute will have some equity in those companies in return for licensing the intellectual property. So we aim to create essentially an empire of spin-off companies using our inventions and collecting revenue from them. And by so doing, see, we're not just going to develop the technology. We're going to do 2 other things. One is we're going to make money so that the Mars Technology Institute isn't just going to be an engine of invention. It's also going to become an engine of finance for not only financing further research, but ultimately, if we're fully successful, financing the settlement of Mars. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's the next thing we're going to do. That is become an engine of finance. And then the third thing we're going to do is, in the process of doing this, we're essentially demonstrating the business model of an actual Mars colony. Okay. That is, rather than go to investors and say, fund a Mars colony and we'll set up an inventors colony there and that will generate IP and you'll get your money. We're going to say first, fund an inventors colony on Earth and we'll show that an inventors colony focusing on the issues that Mars brings to the fore can make money. And then we will both have money to finance the settlement of Mars, and we'll have proven the viability of such a model to investors to also get involved in that.
And in fact, I see that people are already loving the reference to an empire of spin-off companies. And in fact, as I understand it, the structure of the Institute allows for nonprofit activities as well as for-profit activities. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the Mars Technology Lab.
Right. Okay. So the Mars Technology Institute, which we have founded and which is 501c3, tax deductible. You can donate to it. It's tax deductible. It funds research. Okay. Now, we're also in the process of setting up a C Corp called the Mars Technology Lab, whose initial equity will be entirely owned by the Mars Technology Institute. Okay. However, that is an entity that is open to investment. So the idea is that if people, and this is only for qualified investors, okay, This is a high risk investment, and it's a long-term investment. We're not interested in investors that are looking at, what's the easiest way to make the next buck. We're interested in investors who want to use their money to change the world. And I mean, look, this was Musk's attitude with SpaceX and Tesla. Okay, he could have made more money easily by setting up some more .coms and stuff like that. Okay, which is
Right. Or a Facebook game. That's what he once told me, is I could have
right.
made more money by doing a
Sure.
Farmville game.
All right. We're not, but we are looking at people, who want to do that, and who want their put the money to work in that, and understand that it's a long-term investment, but that it could potentially pay off very large, both for Mars, for humanity, and for them, that they can do well by doing good. And so we're going to set up such a vehicle. There's a number of formal steps that need to be taken in order to set that up. But that is in the cards as well. And then we will set up additional C Corps around specific technologies that are spun out.
I understand that there's a QR code up on the screen right now. If people are interested in donating, that QR code facilitates your donation. And you can also go to the marssociety.org website. I suppose there will be information there as well about donating. But how much is going to be required to get this thing off the ground?
Well, we can start relatively small with a couple of $1 million. To begin a research program. I prefer more. And the idea here is that we're going to do research that generates IP that generates income. Also, there's actually going to be about 6 ways that the Mars Technology Institute will assemble funds. The first is donations. Okay. Second is through investment in the Mars Technology Lab. The third is through licensing income, and then also dividends from spin-off companies that we have equity in. And then both the Mars Technology Lab and the Mars Technology Institute, the first is a for-profit corporation, the other is a nonprofit corporation. There are various opportunities that NASA and other government agencies, the National Science Foundation, offers to bid on contracts that are devoted to one or the other of these kinds of entities. My own company, Pioneer Astronautics, my former company, we funded for 27 years, winning over 70 NASA contracts. We never needed investors. We never needed loans. We had income from that, and we generated some IP, which helped in the ultimate sale of the company. And the Mars Technology Lab and Mars Technology Institute will be able to engage in that game as well. So in other words, contract income from NASA and also from private corporations. So there's quite a few different routes for assembling the cash that is needed to do the job.
Do you have a time frame in mind? Like, when do you want to see the Mars Technology Institute open its doors?
I'd like to do it by the first of the year. We are going out with this right now, telling people about it. You should know we've gotten a pretty good response so far, although we've only just put our little toe in the water. You may know that I was recently in Ukraine, and on the way back, I stopped off in Poland at Krakow, and I gave a talk at the university there. And it was a talk about, the entrepreneurial space race, stuff like this. Basically, my book, The Case for Space. And in the question period, someone in the audience asked me a question. He said, "So what's next for the Mars Society?" And I mentioned a few things. We're starting a Mars Technology Institute. Well, at the end of the talk, somebody, this is in Poland, walks right up to the podium and slams down $500 American and says, I want to donate this to the Mars Technology Institute. And then just a couple of weeks ago, someone else who had heard about it through the rumor mill sent us $2,000. And I think, because I think there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for this, because, it's one thing to support the Mars Society, help us spread the word, help us defend, the Mars rover mission. We helped save the Curiosity mission, which was going to be canceled, things like that. And the stations in the desert where we're researching how to explore on Mars. But none of these things in themselves represent a path to actually putting humans on Mars. And what we're doing here, the plan here, is to create not only the technology, but the finances that will enable the settlement of Mars. We don't want to have to, if you rely on NASA, we will never settle Mars. It's possible that Musk might launch a Mars settlement, but I don't want to have to count on that.
And have you talked with Elon Musk about this already?
I've run the idea by him. He's not getting involved at this point, but that's fine, because Frederick Douglass once said, he who would be free must himself strike the blow. Okay. And in another place, he said, he was a Black abolitionist. Emancipation would not be worth half as much if it was done by the efforts of white people alone. Okay. And I think that the people who want to see Mars settled, who have ideas on how to create a more humanistic society on Mars, and I think the most successful Mars society will be the ones that offer people greater chances to exercise their human potential, because those are going to be the ones that actually attract immigrants. We need to be able to do this ourselves and not be dominated by massive corporations or government.
A lot of potential models for an institute. It could be a virtual institute here at the University of Washington. There's a virtual institute for astrobiology, but there's also a physical institute, the Allen Institute, that started out just being for brain science, but now they've taken in cell science and immunology. How do you see the institute being structured? Is there going to be a physical campus?
Eventually, yes. That's our goal. Now, we may start out with only a rather small lab of our own and outsource a lot of research to existing the biotech companies. In other words, we would pay them to do certain parts of the research, and they would get the work, and they could get some equity in the patent, but we would have majority equity in the patent. We're also going to do something that is extremely but the idea is to grow this thing, both grow the central company itself, and also grow its income potential through its IP, and through investments which will come in as we develop IP. To the point where we eventually have a central campus, although we might continue to do some distributed products and projects, and these could occur internationally, by the way, not just in the United States. But in addition to that, we're going to do something which is truly unique, and it builds on the heritage of the Mars Society. The Mars Society, okay, we built the Arctic Station and the Desert Station, and we have the University Rover Challenge, and also the European Rover Challenge, which, by the way, is coming up next week in Poland. I'm actually going to be there. And the amazing thing about these projects is that we've had tens of millions of dollars worth of work done for us without paying for it. That is, we've paid for the materials. Okay, we paid for the materials to build, for instance, the Desert Station, but we didn't pay anybody to build it. We built it. And there's crews that go out to the desert station and do refits. And there are crews that go to the desert station and the Arctic station to do the research that we do there, and we don't pay them; they pay us. Um, and and the rover challenge, you have an amazing amount of work done creating advanced rovers by the university teams themselves, who nobody is paying, but also the people that Kevin Sloan and his staff, who actually operate the rover challenge in the desert. Nobody's paying them, and these are very high quality people who, if you paid them, you'd have to pay them a lot. So,
Mm-hmm.
so this is our volunteer army, and what we're going to do. Um, Once again, the volume of this will depend upon our funding, but we are going to ask for proposals for certain kind of work. For example, initially in biotech, where people say, "Look, I've got a lab," or "Here, I'm a high school teacher and I've got a bunch of students, and we're willing to do this. Here's our experimental program. We're willing to do this. We just need you to pay for the materials."
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a meritorious proposal and the team is credible, we'll fund it. And so that we will create an enormous volume of research work at the cost down at least a factor of 10 below what it costs. Because like you run an R&D company, like 90% of the cost is salaries and benefits. And materials, rent, stuff like that is small. So, and in this case, we don't even have to pay rent. So so we're going to fund this, so that this will amplify our R&D effort. We will pay for the materials. We will own the IP that they generate. But if you think about, for example, say high school students, knowing that they are researching a biotech technology that could enable the human settlement to Mars, how exciting that is to them, and that they're doing something real, that they're part of something grand. This is an enormously powerful STEM initiative on its own terms. Okay,
I imagine some students are already asking, where do I sign up? Because the school term is going to be is pretty much started already. Is that something you plan to roll out sooner rather than later?
It depends on funding, but at the latest, it will be rolled out next school year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And where is it going to be? If you does that determine on is that determined by who is going to be the funder? For example, if Jeff Bezos were to say, "Okay, I'll give you a couple of $1 million and let's put the institute in Kent, Washington," how do you determine where you would have a physical campus?
Well, that would certainly be a convincing argument. So if you're listening, Jeff, let's talk. But the but actually, the Pacific Northwest is one of our favorite areas to put this. Another is perhaps here in Colorado. Those are the two top of the list. Pacific Northwest would be excellent, a very high quality of life. And while costs are very large in Seattle and Bellevue, if you go a little bit further out to Everett or Kent or places like that, the costs can become reasonable, not too different from American norms. And you've got a tremendously intellectual population. You've got the University of Washington, which is a tremendous university. That's actually where I got my PhD. And very strong in, biotech, in aerospace, and in artificial intelligence. Yes. And there's, of course, in the Seattle area, there's a lot of money generated by people who either graduated from the UW or who simply migrated to the area. There's been aerospace there for a long time, including, initially Boeing, of course, but more recently Blue. And whenever you have large companies like Boeing and Blue, you always get large numbers of people who work there for a few years and then branch off and start their own small businesses. That's, for instance, I'm an example of that, Pioneer, and many other people who once worked at Lockheed Martin started small aerospace companies here. So there's a lot of that in Seattle. There, of course, is software money and internet money and this kind of thing. Of course, the most famous being Microsoft, but many others, software and internet related information technology companies, which are now branching into artificial intelligence and virtual reality and all these sorts of things. And then, yes, there's a lot of biotech there. So the
Mm-hmm.
Pacific Northwest is one of our is perhaps the top of the list, and Colorado's an alternative. Costs here are lower, and there's we have some very strong universities here as well. But those two lead the selection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, there are other space institutes. I think one of our people in the audience has mentioned the Space Studies Institute. There's the Lunar and Planetary Institute. Is there a possibility of partnering with these, or is this something that you really want to have as your own thing?
Well, there's certainly possibilities of partnering with anyone. The in aerospace, people team with each other all the time, and if it makes sense to team, um, if there's a certain part of the process that requires elaborate facilities and someone already has them, and furthermore, if they're um, the kind of people that we want to work with, then sure, we team up with them. And the teaming arrangements are possible for both self-funded research projects, and equity could be divided in various ways depending upon who's bringing what to the table. Also, teaming on proposals to NASA, for example. The Well, that's done all the time, as you know, if you look at various teams that bid on things like the human landing system or other stuff.
Right.
It's always teams.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned NASA. Have you talked with anyone at NASA about this, or are they hearing about this for the first time along with everybody else? And also, I assume that you have some advisors, like a board of scientific advisors. Maybe you could talk about the sorts of people who have signed on to this, perhaps that other folks would recognize as people in the space community.
Okay, well, we have some people who just recently retired from NASA, from uh, uh, um, uh, two from NASA Ames. One is Bill Clancy, who's very strong in artificial intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
uh, very strong, and also Larry Lemke, who's a very original thinker from NASA Ames, and Tony Muscatello, who's a chemical engineer and nuclear engineer from Kennedy Space Center. Um, so there's some of them. We've got people that are very strong in the biotech area. Steve Benner, who is actually the first person to synthesize a gene, is on our board of advisors. Shannon Nangle, who's a brilliant young woman who's founded a biotech company of her own called Circe. She's advising us. We have other people who are into aquaponics, because that could be, in other words, that process might involve physical chemical step, something that is clearly biotech as it's currently defined, and then things that are sort of unconventional agriculture. You might combine all three of those to create an end-to-end process. We have nuclear people. Tom Blees, who goes way back to the first breeder reactor efforts in the United States, in Idaho, and who's now involved in a thorium reactor company. David Poston, who created the Kilopower Initiative, is on our board of advisors. We also have people with very strong business backgrounds. Eric Bethke, who created this game, Millions on Mars, and Starfleet games, and many other internet games. So that he's also a person with, well, A, knows a lot about programming, and B, knows a lot about business.
Mm-hmm.
And other people that are very sharp in the business world. So we have people who have strengths in those areas.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned some of the other things that the Mars Society has done over the years, including the challenges and the research stations in Utah and Canadian Arctic. How important is this to you? Is this kind of the big bet for your organization? Is the Mars Society going to rise or fall depending on how this campaign goes?
Well, the Mars Society has existed without this for a quarter century and could continue to exist at its current level and doing a lot of good. I mean, we've been spreading the word. I mean, SpaceX would not exist if there wasn't a Mars Society, because we helped. It wasn't just us, that's for sure, but we helped recruit him to making space his calling, making humans to Mars his calling, and many other people, not only at SpaceX but throughout the entrepreneurial space industry and the old-fashioned space industry, have been rallied to want to make this their life's work by our outreach. Um, you know, we, as I mentioned, we've defended a number of key missions that would have been canceled if not for us, and those include Mars Express in Europe. It include Curiosity here, and which the NASA science administrator at the time wanted to cancel because it was overrunning its budget. And we came out very strongly on that. Hubble, actually, we took a stand for Hubble, and it was very useful because the only other people that were defending Hubble were the Hubble scientists, and people said, well, that's them seeking their self-interest. O'Keefe wanted to kill Hubble and said, what are you worried about Hubble? We're going to the moon and Mars. And I said, if you're afraid to send a rescue mission to Hubble, nobody's going to the moon and Mars. Okay. And so we came out strong and don't desert Hubble. And I'm proud to say we helped run O'Keefe out of his job and got someone in there, Mike Griffin, who was prepared to save Hubble and did. And then there's the stations. So we could do all this kind of stuff. But and regardless of the fate of this initiative, we are going to continue to do all these sorts of activities that we have become known for. But I want to up the game here. I want to get people to Mars. And I have to say, look, I was born in 1952. Okay. And my father and all my uncles served in the war. And, they came back and they had set the world right. Okay. We not only had won the war, we had won the peace. We'd given the Germans and the Japanese better governments than they had ever created for themselves. We created a better world. And then, and the US government did that. And the American people, together with the government, did that. And then they did other things. They did the interstate highway system. They did Atoms for Peace. They did Apollo. And this is what I saw growing up. And that was the government that I knew. And so when I wrote The Case for Mars, I figured, look, what we have here is an aberration. We've had, this happened with Nixon and this happened with Carter and this with this one and that one. But if we can get this thing straightened out and we can have humans to Mars, because look, here's a plan. If we had the kind of determination that we had in Apollo, we could have humans on Mars in 10 years. Okay. But it didn't come together. We've had a governmental senility, and now we have governmental chaos. And it's incredible what is going on right now with the government and the toxic nature of the political discourse that would make any great project extremely difficult for the government to manage. So, we've had something else come in, which has been very productive. Say, well, in view of the fact that the government hasn't been, is no longer credible as the people that could open up Mars, we've had this entrepreneurial thing going on. But and what Musk has done is extremely impressive. He's shown that it's possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that previously thought that only the governments of superpowers could do, and not only that, do it in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost, and even do things that they had deemed impossible altogether. But he's also showing that it's possible for such entrepreneurs to become diverted in their priorities. And so I don't have to count on the space entrepreneurs to do it for him. I am willing to actually count upon the space entrepreneurs to create ever cheaper space flight technologies, because a virtuous cycle has been unleashed by SpaceX's accomplishments. Cheaper space launch means more launches, means launches get even cheaper, and the components of spacecraft become cheaper, and the designers of spacecraft can become less conservative because the launch is cheaper. All this is good stuff. So we're going to have a lot more space activity. But to actually get humans on Mars takes a vision that is sustained and that goes beyond how do we make the most profit doing, an orbital research lab. I think there's going to be orbital research labs, things like this are going to become credible business plans in the very near future. In fact, we're seeing several private space stations
Right.
started. But humans to Mars takes a leap beyond that. And so basically, if this is going to happen, we have to create an institution that is dedicated to this purpose and which can acquire the means to execute this purpose. And that's the purpose of the Mars Technology Institute.
So I have to turn things back over to Ashton, but I had one last question. I know you've been to Ukraine, you've been to Poland. I follow you on social media, and so you're very aware of what the political situation is and the climate challenge, and you've spoken up quite a bit for using nuclear power as part of that mix. It's got to be part of the solution. There are a lot of challenges facing this world. So why would someone spend, a significant amount of money on Mars research rather than fixing the problems that we see here on Earth?
Okay, that's an excellent question. It's because of this, that while I do believe that global warming is real, I do not believe it's the greatest threat facing humanity today, not by a long shot. I do not believe that resource depletion is real. There are people that believe that. There are people that believe overpopulation is real. I do not agree with that. Resources are a function of technology, and the more people, the more inventors, and that's why we actually have much more resources per person than we did 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. But there is something that threatens humanity severely, and that is bad ideas. And in particular, one bad idea. It's the same bad idea that caused the catastrophes of the 20th centuries, and it's threatening us now. And this idea came in a variety of forms, but what it boils down to is there isn't enough for everyone. And so we need to fight it out with them in order to get what there is, or at least to protect what we have from them who they're coming for it. Okay. And of course, this idea that we are in a zero-sum world is promoted by tyrants because the ultimate justification for tyranny is the putative necessity for war, that there has to be central directive leadership. This is the justification of the Putin crowd. It was the justification for Hitler in his day as well, and the various militarists in Japan and what have you. And now, as I said, I don't believe that the resources of Earth are limited, but they seem to be. Okay, to try to prove to someone that the resources of the Earth are unlimited, it's like trying to prove to a mathematically illiterate person that a 1-inch line segment can have an infinite number of points in it. Okay, it seems counterintuitive. No, it's 1 inch long. It doesn't have an infinite number of points in it. Okay. On the other hand, if you can show a line that extends infinitely in both directions, anyone could perceive that has an infinite number of points in it. Okay. And so similarly, if we can show that it's this vision of the future that people have, if people can understand that by working together, we can open up planets, there's no point killing each other over provinces. Okay. And so if you want to save humanity, this is the thing to do, to make it clear that we have available to us this unlimited future. And it's this unlimited future that undermines all those whose rule depends upon the putative necessity for war. Okay. Hitler, he said this idea of perpetual prosperity through scientific invention, he said it is a Jewish plot to undermine people's belief in the necessity for war. Now, it's not a Jewish plot, but it does undermine people's belief in the necessity for war. And I believe that we have to undermine people's belief in the necessity for war. And the greatest way we can do it is by showing that there's an infinite future that is available to us.
Wow.
That's powerful. Excellent. Well, I think this was a very informative. Thank you, Alan, so much for hopping in and helping with this conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got some great information about MTI. I'm really excited for that. So we're going to let Alan go, and we're going to shift gears and start to take some audience questions. There we go. Yes.
Prosper, baby.
Okay.
Good to see you, Robert.
All right. Good seeing you, Alan.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Alan. All right, so I know we've got a ton of questions from audience members, so let's kick it off. The first question that I have for you, Dr. Zubrin, is you've been interested in science and space exploration since you were a young student. At what point did the idea of humans to Mars become one of your primary goals?
I would say in the 60s. I was 5 when Sputnik flew. And it's actually the first major world event that I can remember in terms of my own personal experience. I can remember Sputnik. I can remember, you could look up, you could see it. And now while the adults may have been alarmed by Sputnik, I was delighted. And because I was an early reader and I was already reading science fiction, and what Sputnik said to me was that these stories about space travel were going to be true. And I wanted to be part of it. Now, it took a little longer for me to have a broader understanding of what is real in space and what isn't. But by the early 60s, I had read enough of young adult science books, I mean, real science books, but for people my age, to know Mars was the interesting place. That Mars was the place that was most likely to have life, and it was the place that was the most promising to sell. So it was from that point on, I'd say about the time I was 10 or so. And, you know, in the 60s, we were going to be on the moon by 1970 and Mars by 1980, or to be more exact, 1981. And you know, Saturn by 1990 and Alpha Centauri by the year 2000. I wanted to be part of that, and that's why I learned all the science I could. Now, of course, the only part of that program that was actually realized was we did make it to the moon by 1970.
Right.
But then Nixon aborted the thing. Nixon aborted NASA's plans to have humans on Mars by 1981. If they hadn't, okay, then the first children born on Mars probably would be graduating high school on Mars right about now. But you know, here's the thing. Even though what Nixon did was an amazingly stupid decision, it's kind of like Ferdinand and Isabella telling Columbus after he discovered the New World, get lost, we're not interested. Okay, if he hadn't made that mistake, it would have been made by Carter or the one after that or the one after that. In other words, Apollo could have gone further. It could have gone all the way to Mars, okay, had it not been aborted. But the idea of the settlement of space being supported by this kind of determination, sooner or later that was going to fail. And I have to think that while this entrepreneurial space revolution has been created in significant part by people inspired by the vision of Mars, I don't think by itself it can be counted on to get us to Mars. It can be counted on to create a lot of useful technology to get us to Mars. I think ultimately it's the idea itself that, you know, Victor Hugo said, nothing can stop an idea whose time has come. And that is provided that the idea has messengers that can recruit to its banners the people prepared to make it prevail. And that's what we're doing. I mean, this is the idea that is moving me. It's the idea that moves the Mars Society. And I think that if we create this Mars Technology Institute, the word can be made flesh.
Absolutely. Yeah. It moves me and all of our listeners and all the Mars Society members and everybody that's tuning in today. Great answer here. Another question is, with recent findings, we can sustain life on the moon making oxygen. Does the same prove true for Mars?
Well, you can make oxygen on the moon in many places on the moon out of breaking up iron oxide. The technology to do that exists. It's a somewhat difficult process, but it's doable for sure. And then, of course, at the South Pole, there may be water, which is easier to get oxygen out of.
Mhm.
On Mars, it's still easier because there's plenty of water on Mars. There are glaciers on Mars as far south as 38 North, which is the latitude of San Francisco on Earth. Glaciers that are pure water ice, and they have as much water in them as the Great Lakes. And then there's a carbon dioxide atmosphere, and either carbon dioxide or water or both can you can get oxygen out of either by physical chemical means or, of course, biotechnology. That's how plants make oxygen. So that can be done. So, and my Mars mission plans are based on the idea of doing such things, in particular to make the return propellant, which has enormous leverage for enabling the Mars mission. But if we're going to settle Mars, we need to go beyond making propellant. We're going to have to make all the different kinds of things that people need, or a large number of them. And the top of the list is food. And here's one other thing, by the way, I didn't mention this with Alan. By taking on the challenge of cheap, mass-produced food, okay, we're going to completely refute the canard that space people don't care about the needs of the poor on Earth. Okay, we're going to flush that down the toilet bowl of history. We're going to prove that we can do more good for Earth than all these other people who are always criticizing us.
Sure. Speaking of maybe some criticisms here, do you believe Artemis will be able to send the first man to the moon by 2025? Is that realistic or wishful thinking?
I think it could be done, but it's not going to be done. I don't think that Artemis is being approached with the kind of seriousness and resolution required to do that. Look, Trump started Artemis in 2017. Now, here we are 6 years later. 6 years after Kennedy launched Apollo, it was 1967, the Saturn V had flown, and all the vehicles were very far in development. I have friends in Houston, and they go by Johnson Space Center frequently. And you go by Johnson Space Center on a Saturday or Sunday right now, the parking lot's empty. It was not empty during Apollo on the weekend. Okay. This is just not being approached with the same kind of seriousness as Apollo. So while I don't think it's beyond our means to have people on the moon by 2025, I don't think that Artemis is being pursued in this kind of way. I think a lot of the methodology of Artemis was to throw around a lot of money in lots of directions in order to get a lot of people to support it. There was not a coherent plan. The SLS was designed without the right upper stage, and the Orion capsule is much too heavy for the SLS with the current upper stage. And the Saturn V, the Lunar Excursion Module, and the Apollo capsule were all designed as a set to execute a plan. What we have with Artemis is a variety of programs that exist on their own terms. The SLS, the Orion, the Human Landing System, Starship, the Lunar Orbit Gateway, that each were funded on their own terms, but not as part of a coherent plan.
Sure, there's some disconnect there.
Yeah. It's like building a house out of stuff you happen to pick up randomly at garage sales.
Okay. All right. So not everything fits together. There's a little bit of a disconnect between all the parts here. Got a goal, but we may need to go back to the blueprints there. I do see a question here, and I'm curious the answer. Would you go to the first manned mission to Mars if asked?
Yeah, I would. I don't think I'm going to get the chance. 71 right now. So, frankly, I was 17 when I landed on the moon. And if you had asked me then that, when you're 70, could you believe that there won't be people on the moon and Mars? I would have thought that was ridiculous. Of course, we're going to be living on the moon and Mars by the time I'm 70. But the political class completely dropped the ball, and so what I want to do right now is make sure that people get to Mars. And that's why the remainder of my working life is going to be focused on creating this Mars Technology Institute.
And we're lucky that that is your primary goal. One of the questions I have here is about there's a major economic incentive, or there was, excuse me, for European explorers and traders to cross the Atlantic and eventually discover the New World. Is there a similar incentive for exploring and settling the Red Planet?
Well, okay, now here's a very interesting thing. The colonies that were founded primarily on the basis of economic incentive were not the ones that really had the greatest effect on history. You know, the France at the time of, say, the 1600s and 1700s had 4 times the population of England. Okay, and they did acquire large territories in Canada and the whole Louisiana basin, as well as elsewhere. But these were all set up for the purpose of economic gain, for the purpose of trading widgets with the Indians in return for beaver pelts. They did not try to set up communities. The British, on the other hand, they came here to New England and then mid-Atlantic and elsewhere with the idea of creating communities, of places where people would live, and places with churches and schools and institutions. And guess what? As a result of that, British women were willing to go to North America and French women were not. And in consequence, despite the fact that France was 4 times the size of England, by 1750, when it came down to the final struggle, there were 2 million English-speaking people in North America and 50,000 French. Mm-hmm. And that is because the goal of the colonists was to create a new world. It wasn't strictly a monetary thing. There were certainly various monetary enterprises that were engaged, and some actually did make money and others lost money. But there was a deeper motive. Right. And that's the one that really was decisive in creating a remarkable new kind of nation, which then proceeded to not exactly invent, but demonstrate the potential of democracy, and yes, invent steamboats and telegraphs and centrally generated electrical power and recorded sound and motion pictures and airplanes and nuclear power and computers and the internet and iPhones. And it became an engine of invention for the world. So I think, and that is, those inventions is how America benefited the old world, not by being a source of beaver pelts.
Right. I see our next question here. This is from our own James Melton. When do you believe nuclear power will be developed as the best propulsion system for space travel?
Well, I believe that the most effective way to use nuclear power for space travel is to use it to create chemical propellants on the surface of planets. The chemical propellant that you create, say, out of Martian CO2 and water, is nuclear power in portable form. And furthermore, it can be released at high thrust in a very lightweight and inexpensive engine. So this is true if we're talking about the inner solar system, that is Earth and Mars. Now, if we start talking about getting out there to Jupiter and beyond, then there is a need for more advanced kinds of propulsion systems that depend on nuclear power. But in terms of that is for actual propulsion. But in terms of going to the moon and Mars, this is the best way to do it. This point was actually made to me by Kraft Erika, who was he was an associate of Wernher von Braun, and in the 80s, I was a very strong believer in nuclear electric propulsion, ion drives, stuff like this. And Erika sent me straight on this. And the point he made, okay, at this time we didn't know there was water on the moon, but we knew that there were oxides, and so you could make lunar oxygen. And so you could bring some hydrogen to the moon, and the hydrogen is 1/7 of the propellant when you combine it with oxygen in the RL-10 engine, which he had invented. And he says, look, RL-10 has a specific impulse of 450 seconds. It means it gets 450 seconds. It can do a pound of thrust for 450 seconds with 1 pound of fuel. That's what it means. But if only 1/7 of the propellant is coming from Earth, it effectively has a specific impulse of 3,000 seconds, which is equivalent to the sort of thing electric propulsion could do, but at 100,000 times the thrust and with an engine that weighs 1% as much. So why not do it that way? So you put the reactor on the moon and you have it make the propellant. And this is even more powerfully for Mars, where we don't even have to bring the hydrogen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I was curious as well about your new book that's coming out. So as I showed before, I'm reading Case for Mars right now, but I know you have a new book coming out next year. Can you tell us what to expect in the new book?
Yeah. Oh, there it is. There's the cover. And by the way, it's the first time I've seen the cover.
Surprise!
Okay. So I guess it's open for pre-order on Amazon right now. That's true. It'll be out in February, actually. Basically, the idea here is it will soon be possible for people to go to Mars. And you should realize that if there's reusable space launch vehicles, that means there's going to also be used space launch vehicles. Mm-hmm. Okay, this has not been a thing up till now. Okay, but it's like, new cars can be pretty expensive. And yet people of very limited means, a large number of them own cars. How did they get their cars? They bought them used, which is much cheaper, maybe even a factor of 10 cheaper than the new car. And so you can get some wheels by buying a used car, even if you're someone working at minimum wage. Well, there's going to be used launch vehicles around. And not just from Musk, because there are people who are copying Musk, okay? Mm-hmm. And I happen to know there's at least 5 companies in China that have gotten investment that are working on knockoffs on the Falcon 9 right now. And then also really the New Glenn and the Rocket Lab Neutron have comparable or somewhat better capabilities than the Falcon 9. And if Starship is successful, there will be people who copy that. And some of them won't just be people running their own launch company. Some of them will be people willing to sell them. And then there'll be a used market. And so it'll be possible for groups of people to go to Mars. Okay, so the question then is, what are we going to create when we get there? What is likely to emerge on Mars? And I look at this in the broadest way. I look at the technology, yes, but also the economy, the social and political forms, the architecture, the aesthetics. And I don't look at it from the point of view of trying to design a utopia. I look at it from the point of view of natural selection. That is, I believe that with this capability in hand, there will be many different city-states founded on Mars by people with quite diverse ideas on what the ideal society should be. And then the question is, what is likely to emerge? Okay, what is likely to prevail? In other words, there'll be a lot of noble experiments and people listening to the show. I bet you we got people listening to this show that are libertarians and people who are social democrats and who knows what else we got out there. And you're all going to have a chance to show what you can do on Mars. And I have certain ideas that I in this book, I examine what's likely to prevail. Now, some of it is stuff that I really like myself, okay? Like liberty, okay? I believe that all these anti-utopias that are common in science fiction now of tyrannies being established on Mars or somewhere because the government can turn off your air, I think this is nonsense. Not that it can't happen, but that it can't prevail. No one would emigrate to such a place. In other words, the places that get the most immigrants are going to be the places most attractive to immigrants. Mm-hmm. And they will outgrow those with defective social forms. The I mean, this is why the North outgrew the South. This is why the North won the Civil War. Because there were two different ways early America tried to solve its labor shortage. One was gadgeteering, the other was slavery. And gadgeteering led to high wages and therefore very attractive immigrants. Slavery created a situation where immigrants wouldn't want to go there. Why go to a place? If you're a working man, why go to a place where you're going to have to compete with slave labor? No. And this is why the North had 3 times the population of the South. And it's why in the Civil War, the Union Army was 40% immigrants and first-generation American. The Confederates were 3%. So there'll be noble experiments done. And liberty, I think, and also liberty is essential for invention, which is going to be core to the success of Mars cities, both technically and economically. But then there's other things that I would give mixed reviews to, because I think that a successful Mars city is going to have a great deal of need for social solidarity, and things that bring people together with a togetherness. Okay, well, I'm all for togetherness, but this has been accomplished in many ways on Earth, including things, organized religion, nationalism. And I'm a person who doesn't have any use for organized sports, let alone organized religion. But I do think that Mars is going to have. I don't think you could have a Mars colony that is based on a single religion, but such colonies will remain small because they only attract a narrow segment of the human population. So I think the successful Mars colony will be a melting pot, but it won't be multicultural. It'll because that creates too much division for this kind of thing. But a melting pot, and I think there is a way, while the social solidarity is somewhat in tension with liberty. I think that the ones that can resolve this the best will be the ones that grow, and also which people from Earth find the most attractive. Because one of the things that a lot of people are unhappy about on Earth right now is the atomization of our society. Okay. I think there'll be people that want to be part of a community, which is a real community. But anyway, this is the sort of thing that's explored in the book.
Okay. Well, it's out for pre-order, it sounds like. So check it out on Amazon, The New World of Mars. I see we have another question here about food on Mars. What are your thoughts on the food of Mars? I see something about manna of the desert. Tell us more about that.
Well, now here's the thing. Okay. And I think that the Mars Technology Institute is going to have to look hard at this. Okay. It is possible using microbiological technology to have microbes create proteins. And you can make protein crackers. And in a pinch, you could eat them. But most people wouldn't want to eat them for long. So you need to integrate that with other systems that upgrade that into desirable food. And here's the thing. If you want the most successful colony on Mars will be, for instance, able to draw people from many nations, which means that you need both wheat and rice and dairy. Okay. In other words, Asians eat rice. I mean, to stereotype it a bit, but Europeans, the crop is wheat or corn, and then Europeans use dairy foods, and Asians in general don't. In other words, you're going to have cuisine. People are pretty particular about their food. So I'm looking to be able to make food that isn't just emergency rations, but to create cheap, plentiful food that people will actually like. This is part of the joy of life, to have good food.
Of course, absolutely. Who doesn't enjoy, their favorite meal? If it's going to be attractive for people to go, they got to have some enjoyment, and that comes from food for most people. So having a cuisine that they like is going to make that trip to Mars all the more attractive. I know we're coming up on time here, and today's show is a little bit longer than we normally do, and we're so appreciative of your time. So I've got one more question for you before we finish things up. My last question is, as the driving force behind the Mars Direct approach, how do you assess the progress made in terms of spacecraft technology and mission planning to enable human missions to Mars in the near future? And what are some of the other challenges that still need to be addressed to make this a reality?
Okay. All right. Okay, and I'm going to answer this, but I just want to mention all this sort of thing, the Mars Technology Institute, and all these sorts of questions is going to be discussed at the Mars Society Conference, which is going to be held at Arizona State University, which is near Phoenix, October 5th through 8th. And you can register for the conference and come, and we have a very large number of speakers, and you name it. Okay, so to really get the full measure of discussion of these ideas, come to our conference. And but to get to your point, the greatest progress that has occurred through this entrepreneurial space revolution. And yes, it has been spearheaded by Elon Musk, and who introduced, first of all, different ways to organize the company around fixed price contracts, but then partial reusability, and then increasing degrees of reusability, and going for not just reusability, but rapid reusability. I think SpaceX this year is going to do 100 launches, almost 2 a week. And that's more than double what NASA dreamed about, but didn't do with the space shuttle. The most they ever got was 8. They thought they advertised 40. They did do 8. SpaceX last year did 60, I believe. And this year is headed for 100. And see, reusability only really benefits you if you can reuse something a lot. Okay. If a car is reusable, but if you could only drive it once a year,
right,
and it has a lifetime of 10 years, it means you actually get to drive your car 10 times, not 1,000 times. So the rapid reusability that's being demonstrated by SpaceX, and then this is being emulated. So if Musk could go back to concentrating on Mars, I believe he could have people on Mars within 10 years. I think he really could. I think he is capable of doing that if he refocuses on that. And I think he has that in him. So if he does that, he'll be one of the most important people in human history. He certainly has made significant contributions. He is controversial, and I have to tell you, people know that I'm a very strong supporter of Ukraine, and he is not. So we disagree on that. But one has to hand it to him. His accomplishments with SpaceX and also the Tesla are tremendous. And if he focuses his talent on this, we'll have people on Mars within 10 years. Now, if he does not, then it'll take another 10 years before some of the people that are following him around, that is these other companies that are emulating his accomplishments, they're about 10 years behind him. But basically, he has let the cats out of the box. He has convinced people of the value of entrepreneurial space. And by the way, this has had ramifications outside of space. For instance, in fusion power, there are now entrepreneurial fusion companies that have been funded by investors, even though Musk isn't involved in fusion at all. He's more into solar energy. But he's nevertheless, the message is, maybe the problem with fusion was the problem with cheap space launch. Maybe it isn't fundamentally technical. Maybe it's fundamentally institutional. And if we have an entrepreneurial approach, we can make it happen. So, the jury is still out on this. I'm certainly hoping that Musk refocuses his genius on humans to Mars. I think Twitter was a big mistake. I hope he can get out of it sooner rather than later, because the really positive thing about Musk compared to, say, Bezos is he's done things that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't done them. such as SpaceX and Tesla.
Mhm.
Whereas Amazon, okay, using internet for marketing, someone was going to do it. The Google people, there were other people during search engines. They were just the ones that prevailed over InfoSeek and Yahoo and so forth. But this is something, and Twitter already existed. It's controversial whether he's made Twitter better or worse. But frankly, Twitter is always going to be Twitter. It's always going to be a place where people take shots at each other. And, but Elon, refocus, do humans to Mars. Let's make some history here.
There's so much potential there. Yeah, especially with the reusability if we can focus. I remember watching a 60 Minutes, and I believe he said in the 2030s was the goal of getting humans to Mars. I'm not sure if that's a realistic timeline at this moment, but I would still love to see, a member of my generation be the first that gets to walk on Mars. And so that's my goal as well. That's why I joined the Mars Society. That's why I get to do stuff like this, because I'm passionate about it as well.
Right. And look, we've got a shot here. If they makes a Starship get to orbit this year and it becomes operational to orbit next year, then, in January 2025, when President Haley goes to her advisors and says, look, here's this guy wants to send humans to Mars. If we got together with him, could we have people on Mars by the end of my second term? They're going to say, yeah, Nikki, you could. And it's not going to cost $1 trillion either. We could probably do it with NASA's budget, because there's a bunch of odds and ends that need to be developed that he's not working on, but we could do the surface nuclear power, the vehicles. And she's going to say, well, then let's do it. Okay. So if we can get this kind of thing going so that the next president, assuming the next president is someone who is sane, can see that this is a possibility for them to do. By making it feasible, he's going to make it sellable, and we'll get out to Mars with a public-private partnership by 2032. But if not, this thing could have to wait for the next window and the next company that creates comparable capabilities to SpaceX.
Right, another potential option there, but. Like I said, hopefully he refocuses and we focus on Mars as a collective. You've given us such great insights today, so many things to think about. I want to make sure that I mention, if you guys have other questions, make sure to check out the Reddit AMA, which is happening this Saturday, September 9th, starting at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Dr. Zubrin is going to be taking some additional questions, so please check that out. I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Zubrin, for joining us today and answering all of our questions. This was really insightful, and I just appreciate your time so much. Special thank yous to Executive Director James Burke. Let's do a thank you to our PR Director, Michael Stoltz, our friends at Liftport Group, Michael Lane and Leah Malmos. And thank you, everybody, for joining today and participating in our conversation. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you, everybody, so much. And we'll wrap things up for today. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye. And thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
See you at the conference.
We'll see you all there.